Welcome to the 7 Minutes to Better Selling podcast. I'm your host, Colin Lake, president and founder of Developing the Next Leaders. So I'm going to jump right into it and welcome Mark Magnaco on with us. And so I'm real happy to have Mark join us, who is the president and co-founder of Allego. So Mark, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here, Colin. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you, my friend. Well, again, welcome. So Mark, if you would share with the listeners your journey and how you get to the president and founder of an amazing technology firm that I happen to use, believe in, and talk about often.
Well, Colin, it is kind of an interesting story because for many of your listeners in financial services, I grew up in financial services. I'm a former financial advisor. I actually got my Series 7 when I was 19. And fast forward about 10 years later, I wrote a book called The Product Is You, all about helping advisors create a personal brand. And some of the asset management and insurance companies that I worked with decided that they would license the content of the book. And so, long story short, it began, my journey to this new business began with certifying a group of wholesalers in the content from that book and realizing how hard it was to do that. We had to fly everybody into the home office. We had to have all the management team there and listen to them. And the company had just provided iPads for everybody. So the epiphany that hit me was, well, wait a minute. What if we just had everybody record their presentation on the iPad and then share it so that myself and their manager could watch the video and be able to either certify them or deny them and tell them you have to do it again. Hey, you should build a software company rather than just try to build an app. And I said to him, well, I don't really know anything about the software business because I'm from financial services. And he said, well, I do. And that's the genesis of how Allego happened. And I tell people, Colin, it's a little bit like starting a band with Paul McCartney. It doesn't mean you're going to succeed, but you have a huge advantage up front for me having Yu Chun Lee as my partner.
Mark, by the way, I was a big Family Ties fan. Yes. How close does the original software that you were talking about look like today's?
You know, the answer is, interestingly, there's a couple components of it that, believe it or not, are similar, but it is as different as the first flip phone you ever owned and your latest iPhone. Like they are what it can do, what it's capable of. The evolution from the original idea is really enormous. But they're still little kernels of the core thing that those folks at the very first company back in 2013 would recognize.
Yes. You know, like I mentioned, I've used the software a number of times, and over the years I've used it for similar stuff, but the evolution that I've seen has been impressive. So congratulations on that. And by the way, for everyone else on the phone, wholesalers, just use that term interchangeably for salespeople or sales executive if you're not in the financial services industry. Okay, Mark, so second question or second thought from like your experience, and you've had a lot of experience, and I'll use air quotes around this, selling, because you always had this consultative approach where people just were drawn to what you were talking about. But from like a selling perspective, what would you say is the greatest lesson or opportunity salespeople have in today's world, like 2021, almost 2022, with us living in this hybrid or virtual world? Like there's so much happening. What would you suggest would be the best lesson or opportunity for folks to consider?
The word is orchestration. And it's not just me saying it. And it's not just because our book is called Mastering Virtual Selling, Orchestrating Sales Success. Colin, everyone's saying it. McKinsey, the consulting firm, Forrester, the research firm, they call it orchestrating omni-channel. And what they mean by that is the ability for a great seller to pivot between being in a virtual realm, being able to move to in-person, being able to use text, being able to use email, being able to use all of the different channels of communication, one of which is meeting platforms like this, another of which is in-person meetings. But those people who can orchestrate and move from one part of the process to the other, recognizing that different people have different communication preferences, and at different times of the sales process, you need to be good at different things. So the old school folks who are thinking, I'm just going to hold my breath and see if it goes back to all in person, I'm telling you, that is likely to end up the way that many of the radio stars ended up when television came in. They missed the mark because something better came along. It doesn't mean radio went away. We still have radio today, but radio is not the same medium as television. So it required a different skill set. That's what's happening in sales right now. And that's the number one thing we see that salespeople need to change. That's
awesome. So I love the thought. I have two questions. One, the second question, so I just have you marinate on that, is how did we get a hold of that book? Because I'm sure many would be interested or are already interested in getting a hold of that book. That's the second question. My first question is this, Mark, like, how does the seller know the buyer's preference? Like, how do you know, like, the difference between someone who wants to meet live, wants to meet virtually,
Yeah, it's a great question. So two things, Colin. First of all, for any of your listeners, all they have to do is send you an email and say, I want a copy of Mastering Virtual Selling. And Colin, we will make the PDF copy of the book available to any of your listeners at no charge. And it's $19.99 on Amazon. That's number one. Yeah. And then remind me, number two is?
How do you know, like, what the best channel is to approach your client? And like, they may say, I want virtual, but actually the best way to sell to them is personal. So they don't always tell us early on in the sales process what the best way. So like, do you have any tips, tricks, strategies to figure that out?
Yeah. The first one is to ask the question, right? The question, the very simple question, which is, what's your preferred communication style? And sometimes, Colin, we have a bias. And the bias that we have is we are more comfortable in one arena versus the other. So the takeaway, Colin, is this. It doesn't mean in person isn't important in building rapport and building relationships and maintaining them. The question is, how much of the business stuff can you do this way so that when you are in person, you can be doing things that are more focused on building the relationship rather than using that time to do stuff that could easily be done, like walk through a Morningstar report or some other type of collateral.
That's great. That is really good. And, our firm has this training called the Well-Asked Question. And your point about, like, we just have to ask. And we have to ask in as sincere a way and as open a way as we can so that they are forthcoming and do share. I prefer a mix. I prefer pure virtual and then execute on that. So that was great. So email me. You heard that wonderful offer by Mark Magnacca, an early holiday present for all of you out there. So Mark, thanks again for joining us, and everyone else, continued good selling and enjoy the holiday season.